After more than 7 years of war, Algeria had won its independence. But for Algerians, freedom did not bring democracy. Instead, a new political regime took shape, one that fused military power, ideological conformity, and a deep mistrust of pluralism. At its center was Ahmed bin Bella, a man hailed by some as the hero of liberation, and by others as the architect of a new dictatorship. On September 15, 1962, bin Bella was elected president of Algeria with 95% of the vote. In Kabyle, however, nearly half the population abstained. The cult of personality returned to Algerian politics. In an interview with Philippe Herman of the newspaper Le Monde, bin Bella exclaims, "You want me to tell you the truth? Well, I am Algeria's only chance." In another vein, the relatively significant abstention of Kabyle in the presidential referendum foreshadows the dissidence of Kabyle in the forthcoming years. Bin Bella's first government, made up of 19 ministers, was formed on September 26, 1962. It came exclusively from the Tlemcen group and included 4 Kabyle ministers: Idir Zaher, Ahmed Boumendjel, Amar and Bachir Boumaza. Their choice reflects the central point of bin Bella's program, that is, the Arabization of the Kabyles through Islam and by the Kabyles themselves. Bin Bella drew a distinction between the so-called real activists, meaning those who joined him in Tlemcen or Algiers immediately after his installation, and the false activists, that is to say, all the others. This distinction determines the choice of diplomats, senior civil servants, executives, and so forth. Their fate depended on which group they belonged to: promotion, exclusion, even arrest or torture. At independence, any linguistic and cultural demand that created a distinction between Arabs and Berbers was denounced by official propaganda as a colonial, neo-colonial, imperialist, or even Zionist plot. The new regime, supported by the international Arab press, held a monopoly on all means of information in Algeria. The official discourse focused essentially on bin Bella's favorite theme: we will always be Arabs and Muslims. With the Arabo-Islamic identity of Algeria secured, and democracy, secularism, and pluralism suppressed, a new power struggle began between 2 FLN leaders, bin Bella and Khidr. While the first moves closer to the political left, the second intends to lead the party by relying on religious conservative forces. The month of Ramadan coinciding with the opening of this conflict, Khidr urges Algerians to respect it scrupulously and to denounce the offenders. He declares on the radio that any Muslim who does not strictly practice Ramadan could not be considered Algerian. This conflict between bin Bella and Khidr brings back a certain use of Islam, which will strengthen the fight against secularist ideas defended mainly by the Kabyles. The Islamic moral order resurfaces with force. The official ideology seeks to eliminate from the Algerian political scene all democratic, secular, and pluralist revolutionary forces. The opposition between the national language, Arabic, and the language of the colonizer, French, widely deployed by the Algerian regime, represses the Berber dimension of Algeria. This framework paints the Kabyles opposed to Arabization as Francophiles, therefore anti-national, and accuses them of being nostalgic for colonialism. Furthermore, the isolation and neutralization of all political opponents are carried out in parallel by bin Bella's personal police set up by the Egyptian secret services and Boumedienne's military security, led by Colonel Qasdi Merbeh. The French journalist Jean-Louis Hurst described Merbeh as the leader of the Kabyle de service, a term used to refer to Kabyle officials who were appointed to high-ranking positions precisely in order to legitimize and enforce the regime's policies of subjugating Kabyle and suppressing the Kabyle language and culture. On a separate note, the new Algerian regime is very influenced by Egypt. Algiers was so aligned with Cairo that when the conflict broke out between bin Bella and Khidr, they didn't settle their disputes in the National Assembly. They turned to the Egyptian ambassador instead. On July 2nd, 1963, Ahmed denounced what he called Ben Bella's personal dictatorship, blind, all-powerful, and stubborn. He called the newly adopted constitution a constitutional monster, and urged thoughtful citizens to reject this chaotic regime of mediocrity, improvisation, and arbitrariness. Ahmed and around 10 deputies, almost all Kabyles, withdrew from the political scene before the assembly passed on August 28th by 135 out of 194 votes, the government's draft constitution. This first constitution of independent Algeria decrees the Arabization of the entire territory, and therefore of the Berbers, whose linguistic and cultural rights are denied. Here are some articles of this constitution. Article 2. Algeria is an integral part of the Arab Maghreb and the Arab world. Article 4. Islam is the state religion. Article 5. The Arabic language is the national and official language of the state. Article 76. The effective achievement of Arabization must take place as soon as possible on the territory of the Republic. For the Berbers, therefore, there was no difference between French Algeria and Arab Algeria considered as a province of the so-called Arab nation. In both cases, their historical existence is obscured and denied, their language and their culture despised.
This moment of national independence for the people of Algeria, the creation of a great new state, represents the devoted and courageous work of the Algerian people and their leaders, stretching over many years. I congratulate them. We wish you every success in the future, and I want to assure you of our wholehearted desire to work in cooperation with you and your leaders on behalf of peace and prosperity and the progress of your people and mine and of all mankind.
After Algeria's declaration of independence, the United States was one of the first countries to officially recognize the new Algerian state. This swift recognition can be attributed to the intense diplomatic efforts carried out by Algerian nationalists during the War of Liberation, notably by Kabyle figures such as Hussein Ahmed and Mohamed Yazid. John F. Kennedy and his new administration had high hopes for this new Algeria, which they envisioned evolving along the American model, both democratic and pro-Western. On October 15, 1962, the president of the Algerian Council, Ahmed Ben Bella, was received at the White House by President Kennedy. This meeting symbolized a desire for openness and cooperation. However, just a few days later, Ben Bella traveled to Cuba to meet with Fidel Castro, at the height of the missile crisis, when the world was on the brink of nuclear war. This gesture was seen in Washington as a provocation, even as a betrayal, and marked the beginning of a cooling in relations between the two countries. It also symbolized Algeria's gradual shift toward the Soviet bloc.